This will sound very strange, but a baby that was born in a parking lot at a 7-Eleven in West Virginia on the date 7-Eleven, on the same day that two shooters robbed 7 different 7-Elevens in California, are prophetic signs from God that reveals that Kamala Harris, who was the senator from California, will die in a plane crash on the date 1-7, which outside of the US is written as 7-1, which hints at 7-Eleven. And the trail of signs leading to the date 1-7 goes through the date 11-7, November 7th, which outside of the US is written as 7-11, which is what this baby born in the parking lot of a 7-Eleven on the day that 7-Elevens were robbed hints at. These prophetic signs were on 7-Eleven in 2022, which was also the day of a passenger airline crisis that the media dubbed as Airmageddon. The prophetic signs on 7-Eleven in 2023, which was the once in 1,000 years flooding event in New England and Vermont, and the 2023 All-Star Game next to the Space Needle Tower in Seattle, are also prophetic signs that point to the predicted date that Harris will die in a plane crash on 1-7, as well as the date it is predicted that a solar storm and coronal mass ejection from the sun will hit Earth and cause catastrophic power outages in America on the date 2/22 in 2024. And these prophetic signs from God are just scratching the surface of what will be explained in this truly epic and most important video. Make sure you watch this entire video. The date that this video is posted proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. All right, this video is one of the most amazing videos ever. It is filled with profound information and very, very important information. Make sure you watch all of the video. I believe I will cut it into 2 or 3 parts. So make sure you watch all 3 parts. The information will constantly be new, and all 3 parts will be necessary. You will not be able to get what you need to get out of it by only watching a certain amount of the video. And so let's begin with what I wrote here to some friends explaining what happened on this July 11th date. First, before we begin, it's clear from this email that this was written in July of 2023, and this video was produced before October 17th, 2023. And as you will see in this video, I will describe how God's big picture of signs was pointing to the date 1017, which also hints at 7-Eleven, because 1017 also gives us 2 1s and a 7. And so God was in fact pointing to the date 1017, and all of the analysis in this video is correct. 1017 was a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date 11-7, which is 21 days after 1017. 21 is 3 sets of 7, and the prophetic signs that we received on 1017 revealed adding the additional 3 times 7 days to get the date 11-7. And so to learn more about the prophetic signs that occurred on 1017, which are very, very important and profound, otherwise, of course, why would God have been going through so much effort to point to 1017 as a step in the trail leading to 11-7? To learn about these signs on 1017, Watch the must-watch Gaza explosion video, among many other things, including a Kamala Harris plane crash sign. This was the day that the explosion occurred in the hospital in Gaza. But that doesn't say anything. Make sure you watch that video. It's very important, very profound, and a big part of God's plan here with his big picture of signs. All right, the last minute or so that you just listened to was produced before November 7th. November 7th, 11/7. And again, this, as I explained at the beginning of the introduction, this video is about, well, not, it isn't. It's just one of many things that are part of this video. But one theme of it is this 7/11, and that's why 10/17 as well. And as I just mentioned, these two dates are 3 sets of 7 days apart. The date 10/17, which insets 2 1s and a 7, is 3 times 7 days before November 7th, another 2 1s and a 7, 11/7. Ultimately, these are hinted at with the 7/11 signs that I mentioned, and I will be explaining in this video. The signs, though, on 11/7, the amazing signs, also revealed they were in fact themselves 3 sets of 7 signs. In other words, symbolism from the book of Joshua in the Bible. And these signs on 11/7 are in fact another 3 sets of 7 days before the date it is now predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on November 28th. And these signs, both on 10/17 and 11/7, are explained in the must-watch Gaza explosion video. All right, November 28th also ended up being a step in the trail of signs, and the signs that occurred on this date will also be explained in the Gaza explosion video. And the signs revealed on that day revealed adding 40 days, and that'll be explained. But anyway, they connect to the date 1/7. So in other words, we have this trail of signs from 7/11 in 2022 to 10/17, 2023 to 11/7 and then 1/7. That's a lot of 1s and 7s. And part of this will be explained in this video, why this is relevant. Also, why this is relevant is explained in the foundational video, which is titled Harris's plane will crash on 1/7 equals eclipse peaked at 1:17 p.m. This is a big reason why she will die on the date 1/7. And it is why, or one reason why, a big reason why, her plane crash will be in St. Louis, which is where the great American eclipse peaked at 1:17 p.m. And so anyway, what I am saying is make sure that you watch the foundational video that I just mentioned. Harris's crash on 1/7 equals eclipse peak at 1:17 p.m. Very important video. This was an extremely prophetic date. It was known in advance that God was pointing to this date and that it would be very important, and God did not disappoint. He provided some truly remarkable and astounding prophetic signs, which I am very excited to tell you about. First, just to document here that this email was composed on July 12th. Okay, this information that includes predictions for the date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, which will be October 17th, for example. Also, the date it is predicted that a dirty bomb will explode in Manhattan on September 25th, 2023. And the date that Barack Obama will become the president on November 19th, 2023. And the date that Michelle Obama will become the vice president on November 5th, 2023. And the day that she will become the 47th president on November 13th, 2023. And so anyway, this is to verify and document that this video is being produced, or this email is being produced on July 12th, or was composed on July 12th. And you can read the description box of this video to learn the date that this video was posted, which will also document that these predictions are being made ahead of time. All right. So it was expected that there would be a major prophetic sign on July 11th. Part of the expectation is that a high place would be part of this sign. The prophetic signs on July 11th fit this analysis. The two biggest signs, or the two biggest news stories of the day, were the prophetic signs that were expected. The flooding in Montpelier, Vermont, and the unexpected critical tweet to the NATO leaders at the summit from the 44-year-old leader of the 44 million people nation. From the NATO summit, Biden issued an emergency declaration for Vermont. So Biden is tied into this NATO summit prophetic sign. And what I mean by the 44-year-old leader of the 44 million people nation is that right before the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, Zelensky turned 44 years old, and Ukraine was made up of 44 million people. This is because God is using Zelensky as Antichrist symbolism to point to the 44th president, Joe Biden's old pal, that he will make president again. From July 10th to 11th, New England was hit with an unusual slow-moving storm that dumped a summer's worth of rain in 2 days, and was said to be a once-in-1,000 years rain event. This was actually said to have occurred at West Point. It was a once-in-1,000 years rain event at West Point in New York, and that hinted at judgment on one of America's two pillars of strength, which is its military. On July 11th, Montpelier, Vermont, was submerged underwater from the Winooski River. In downtown Montpelier, water level reached the tops of parking meters, and every building's ground floor was inundated with water. The water level at the nearby Wrightsville Dam came within 1 foot of its maximum capacity, and there was a serious threat that the dam would burst, which would have made the disaster in Montpelier exponentially worse. However, because it was too late to evacuate the area due to the condition of roads, residents were instead told to go to the upper levels of their homes. Emergency services rescued 110 people in Montpelier. The flooding across the state of Vermont was the worst since 1927. The date, July 11th, 7/11, hints at Genesis 7:11, which is the verse in which the flood judgment began. In Genesis 7:11, quote, "The fountains of the deep burst forth," unquote. This is why the dam threatened to burst on 7/11, and why there was a once-in-1,000 years flooding event. Although the epic storm and flooding was widespread across the Northeast and New England, the focus of the story happened to be the capital of Vermont. Montpelier has a population of 8,000 people, and this is the least populous capital city of any state. In other words, the focus of this rain event could have been any of a number of other small cities in New England. The reason why Montpelier was underwater and why it was threatened by a dam that might have burst is because the name Montpelier gives us high place symbolism. Montpelier is French, and Mont comes from the Latin mons, which means mountain. A mountain is a high place, and in the Bible, the quote-unquote high places is a euphemism for the religious worship of false gods the Jews would do on the tops of mountains. The Hebrew word for high place is Bama. Barack Obama is Hebrew for lightning from heaven, which is a phrase Jesus used when referring to Satan. in Luke 10:18. The capital of the state is symbolism for the capital of the nation, in which the Antichrist will rule from as the president of the U.S. The Antichrist will persecute God's people. The residents were told to go to the upper rooms of their homes because on the first Pentecost of the church age, a feast that symbolizes the church, the disciples of Jesus in Jerusalem waited in the upper room for the Holy Spirit to come down on them. It was the worst flooding in Vermont since 1927, and the capital city of Vermont was submerged under river water and was threatened by the dam on the date 7/11. On July 7th, 7/11, in 1927, the Jordan River's water was stopped for 21 hours at precisely the area of the river that had been stopped for the Hebrews that crossed it when they entered the Promised Land, as recorded in the book of Joshua in the Bible. Joshua led the Hebrews in the crossing of the Jordan River, and he died at the age of 110. 110 residents of Montpelier were rescued by emergency services on 7/11 in 2023. The Jordan River was stopped on 7/11 in 1927 when the strongest earthquake in modern history in Palestine, the area of Israel, struck nearby the Jordan River, sending a tall dirt cliff into the river. The earthquake is referred to as the Jericho earthquake, and after the Hebrews crossed the Jordan into the Promised Land, they took the small city of Jericho. Prior to crossing the Jordan River and entering the Promised Land, the Hebrews had left Egypt and their persecutor, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and the ruler of the Nile River civilization. The king of Egypt is a type for the Antichrist king. In the Bible, the king of Egypt requested that Joseph interpret his dream for him. The dream regarded 14 cows, and the second set of 7 cows is symbolism for the end times period of the Antichrist's rule, which is 7 years. The 14 cows symbolize 14 years in the account in the book of Genesis. In other words, the interpretation that Joseph gave to the king is that the 14 cows in his dream were symbolism for 14 years. The latter half, or the second set of 7 cows, because the 14 cows in the dream were broken into 2 sets of 7 cows, 7 cows of prosperity and 7 sickly cows, which Joseph explained symbolized 7 years of prosperity followed by 7 years of famine. And that is symbolism for the end times, because in Daniel chapter 9, we also have a symbolic 7 years regarding the end times period of the Antichrist. And the Antichrist, we also know from Bible prophecy, will be in charge of the food supply, which will be rationed to those that take the mark of the Antichrist, which is exactly what happens in Egypt in the book of Genesis. Joseph is given control of the food supply by the king for having interpreted the dream. And then the food is rationed during the famine. All right. This is why Montpelier, the capital city that was flooded by a river, which hints at the Nile River, is the capital of the 14th state to join the Union. The 14th state hints at the 14 cows in Egypt. The river hints at the Nile River in Egypt, and the capital city hints at the ruler of Egypt in the capital of Egypt. The ruler of Egypt is symbolism for the Antichrist, who will rule in the end times from the capital of the nation. The 7-Eleven convenience store chain was founded in Dallas in 1927, the same year as the prophetic Jericho earthquake on 7/11 in 1927. in God's signs, Dallas is symbolism for the American evangelical church, and God often uses Dallas in his signs in context of warning of judgment for the evangelical church, which is the church of Laodicea, the church that thinks it is in need of nothing because of their false doctrine of once saved, always saved, and Calvinism, for example. I just want to maybe add here too, how many of the Christians listening to this do anything? And the reason why they don't do anything is because of their false doctrine. But doing is Christianity. Faith without works is dead faith, right? And the only place in the Bible where it says faith alone is when James said, you see, for a man is justified not by faith alone, but by his works. So anyway, I want to encourage Christians that aren't doing anything to do something. And the best thing, and for those that claim to have given their lives to Jesus, I want to encourage them to actually do some things that make it seem like you in fact gave your life to Jesus. I mean, literally. And so work yourself to the bone. And my question too is, if you aren't handing out flyers everywhere you go, why? You should be handing out, in my opinion, everyone can do this unless they have a health condition. And if you are watching this video and you believe that this is true, and furthermore, the prediction has come to pass, in my opinion, it should be obvious that the thing to do is to promote this channel. It isn't my channel. It is the Lord. This is a prediction from God. And now that you are privileged to have known about this information in this video, you should be working yourself to the bone, getting the word out and handing out flyers, warning people about what is about to happen. Like now, like, okay, maybe you have a job after work, put the flyers on car windshields in busy parking lots, hand them out on street corners, put them in mailboxes. If you would like the file for the flyer I hand out, please email me and I will forward it to you. You can visit my website, harriscrashprediction.com, and to get the email address, or you may be able to find it in this video. The call for which is taught in Dallas in the seminaries. The call of the residents of the call for the residents of Montpelier to wait in their upper rooms on the date 7/11, due to the worst flooding event since 1927, hinted at the founding of the 7-Eleven Company in 1927, which was founded in Dallas, which symbolizes the American church. On March 10th, 2023, the Japanese billionaire who turned 7-Eleven into a global empire died at the age of 98. This is because the Antichrist will rise to power after it is predicted that U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will die in her plane when it will fall from a high place 98 days after the flooding in the capital city of Montpelier on the date 7/11. Harris will die 98 days after the date 7/11, and this is why the Japanese billionaire who turned 7-Eleven into a global empire died at the age of 98. The Antichrist will lead a global empire. Well, don't misunderstand. I do not infer here or believe that prophecy says that the Antichrist will rule every nation on earth. That's not the case. I am now completely convinced that we are talking about the Western world. So it will somewhat be a global empire because we have the United Nations, which other nations follow, and the Antichrist will lead the United Nations. So in that respect, he will lead a global empire. Let's just leave it at that. In Bible prophecy, and I'll explain that more in other videos, what I mean. In Bible prophecy, the period of the Antichrist is symbolized by 42 months. The Japanese billionaire who turned 7-Eleven into a global empire died 123 days before the date 7-Eleven. The number 123 is the 42nd semi-prime number, and this hints at 42 months in Bible prophecy. In other words, this 123 days connection gives us Antichrist symbolism. And if you are not familiar, a semi-prime number is a number that is only divided by two other prime numbers. And God uses prime numbers for symbolism in his prophetic signs. And this prediction will prove that. And furthermore, this prediction will prove that this is God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections that is being explained on this channel and is only being explained on this channel. This 123 days and then 98 days is equal to 31 weeks and 4 days, which is also 7 months and 7 days. 31 weeks and 4 days hints at the number pi, 3.14, and Kamala Harris's plane will crash in the city, St. Louis, that has the area code 314. Her flight path will mirror and point to Flight 77 on 9/11, which was from Los Angeles on its which was from Washington D.C. on its way to Los Angeles. And 7 months and 7 days hints at this, as does the date of her crash on 10/17, October 17th, which hints at 117, which hints at 11 times 7, which equals 77. So Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash as it flies over St. Louis on its way from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles on October 17th. As recorded in the Bible, the Apostle Peter wrote that the coming judgment of God's on the world will be symbolized by destruction by fire, unlike the first judgment, which was by water. In the Bible, the flood judgment commenced in Genesis 7:11. Exactly 7 months and 11 days after the once in 1,000 years flooding event on the date 7/11 will be the predicted judgment by fire when a solar storm, coronal mass ejection, will hit Earth and cause catastrophic power outages in America. The other main story on 7/11 in 2023 was the harsh tweet that Zelensky posted in condemnation of the NATO leaders not being more specific about Ukraine joining NATO. It was a bluster from the man who had turned 44 years old just prior to the beginning of the Ukraine-Russia war, when Ukraine was made up of 44 million people. God is using Zelensky as symbolism for the Antichrist, the 44th president. This significant and unexpected criticism from Zelensky, in which he chastised the West's leaders at their summit gathering, is symbolism for the 44th president taking charge of the Western nations in his role as the Antichrist. This is hinted at through the date 7/11 and the connection to the global empire 7-Eleven company. And the reason, I'll just say this too, the reason why the Antichrist is a Westerner, there's two Antichrists described in Bible prophecy, and they both are leaders of the West. The first of the two is Pope Francis, and the second beast described in Revelation chapter 13 that speaks like a dragon is the president that became president due to his ability to deliver a speech and lie at the same time, is Barack Obama, the 44th president. And the judgment, the wrath of God, is coming on the nations that knew God. That's the primary focus of God's end times tribulation and judgment. It is judgment on the nations that knew God, and now they are being judged for that. That's why the Antichrists are the leaders from the Western nations. And we can confirm that, by the way, through other prophecy as well. If you are someone that knows some things about Bible prophecy, we have the statue in Daniel chapter 2, which is clearly talking about the descendant civilization from Rome, which is, of course, today Europe. Okay, let's move on. This is only the beginning of what the signs on 7-11 opened up in regards to the bigger picture. The rest is too much to type out and will be explained in a diagram in a video. And that video will be this video. It may be part 2 or 3 of this video, but make sure you watch that because we're only getting started here, okay? The story of the Hebrews crossing the Jordan River and taking Jericho involves a woman in Jericho who is a harlot. Kamala Harris got her start in politics through being a whore. This is why her predicted death connects to the signs on 7-11, which connect to the Jericho earthquake. Okay, so again, the Hebrews took the promised land after they took Jericho, and in the story it involves a harlot, and this Jericho earthquake connects to 7-11, which in turn connects to the date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash. And if you didn't know, she got her start in politics through sleeping with the mayor of San Francisco. All right. And so that's the connection there. And God is using that to point. It isn't the only Kamala Harris whore prophetic sign that confirms what I just said. The Interstate 89 highway runs through Montpelier, and 89 is the 24th prime number, which hints at the Antichrist and the tribulation in 2024, including the fire from the sun 7 months and 11 days after 7-11, which will be on February 22nd, 2024. The date 7-11 hints at 7 times 11 equals 7-11, and hints at Flight 77, as does the date October 17th, 1017. In other words, the dates 7-11 and 1017 both contain 2 1s and a 7, and they mirror each other, which is why these two dates connect profoundly with 98 days, because 98 days hints at the 98-year-old that turned 7-11 into a global empire. Also, the I-89 highway that goes through Montpelier is a mirror for 98. In other words, not only does the I-89 hint at 2024, but it also confirms the 98 days connection between the two dates that mirror each other. Okay? So, God, if you will, no pun intended, got 2 birds with 1 stone here. It's not a really nice idiom, but so because he hinted at 2024 with the I-89, it could have been the I-98. It could have been the I-98, but it isn't, and that's because he got 2 things with one thing. So anyway, that's why 98 and 89. I hope you got that. It also confirms the mirror of the 2 dates as well. And by the way, the I-89, I think I explained this later in this email thread, it connects Montpelier to the I-93 highway, and the sun is 93 million miles away from Earth, and it is 7 months and 11 days from the date 7-11 to the eruption on the sun that is 93 million miles away from Earth. The mirroring of I-89 into 98 also confirms mirroring the dates. That's what I just said. The I-89 connects to the I-93 and terminates at the I-93. The flooding on the I-89 on 7-11 connects with 7 months and 11 days to the fire from the sun that is 93 million miles away. The sign on 7/11 was the worst flooding event in Vermont since 1927. Vermont means Green Mountain. The name of its capital city, Montpelier, is also a name that means mountain. Also on 7/11 was the baseball All-Star game, in which the highlight of the game was a 2-run home run by the player for the Colorado Rockies, a team named after the Rocky Mountains. The game was played in Seattle, known as the Emerald City for its temperate rainforest climate, and the logo for the game, this All-Star game, included evergreen trees and an image of nearby Mount Rainier. Mount Rainier is the highest peak in the state of Washington, the topographically most prominent peak in the contiguous U.S., and is the most topographically prominent peak in the contiguous U.S. In the Bible, the quote-unquote high places is a euphemism for the false religious worship the Jews would practice on the tops of mountains. This high place symbolism connects Vermont to the All-Star game in Seattle. All right, you got that? Because Seattle, the game here with the logo and everything, and the Mount Rainier, okay, in the Cascade Mountain Range, with the home run that was hit by the player from the Rocky Mountain State, the Colorado Rockies is the name of the team. This is all, the connection between this game and the flooding in Vermont is confirmed through the high place symbolism. And the very beginning of this video, I mentioned that it was expected before July 11th, 7/11, that there would be high place signs or a sign with high place symbolism on this date because of the connections to 7/11 that were known ahead of time to have also contained high place symbolism. And so anyway, we have another sign. Here is the third sign. Again, I've talked about the NATO sign and I've talked about the flooding in Vermont. The third sign is this All-Star game, which is amazing when I explain it all. But the first thing to establish is the correlation between the flooding in Vermont and the baseball game. And this is through, first of all, the high place symbolism. The player for the Rockies that hit the home run near Mount Rainier was born on the date 11/17, November 17th in 1990. The date 11/17 leaves 44 days remaining in the calendar year. The date 11/17 hints at a prophecy in Zechariah 11:17, in which God describes the Antichrist as his worthless servant, which is the 44th president. The date 11/17 also hints at the 1117th word in Strong's Hebrew Concordance, H1117, which is the Hebrew word Bama, and it means high place. Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven, which is a phrase that Jesus used to refer to Satan. Well, Bama in fact means high place, which in the Bible is a metaphor for heaven. For example, in Isaiah chapter 14, it says that Lucifer fell from the high place, which is a metaphor for falling from heaven. And so Barack Obama's name literally means, and O in the language that, Barack means lightning, and O in Aramaic, the language Jesus would have spoken, is from. And so Barack Obama means lightning from high place. But again, high place is a euphemism for the false religious worship that the Jews would do on the tops of mountains, And it is also a metaphor in the Bible for heaven. And Jesus said in Luke 10:18 that he saw Satan falling like lightning from heaven. And Barack Obama means lightning from heaven. And so either Jesus didn't know what he was saying when he said that, or he knew that there would be a famous president named Barack Obama and knew that this would confuse us and said it anyway, or he was revealing the identity of the Antichrist. Obviously, the latter option is the only one that makes any sense, and therefore Barack Obama is the Antichrist. Case closed with that alone. But I can times that by 10,000 with God's prophetic signs that are explained on this channel, including what I'm explaining right here. Barack Obama in Hebrew means lightning from heaven, as I just said. In the Bible, a 30-year period is symbolic of a king, as David and Joseph were made kings at the age of 30. This player was born on 11/17 in 1990, exactly 30 years before Barack Obama released his book, A Promised Land. This connection identifies Obama as the Antichrist king. The title of his book, A Promised Land, is a reference to the Hebrews' crossing of the Jordan River into the Promised Land. The birth date of the player who hit the home run points to Obama's A Promised Land book. And he hit the home run on the day of the prophetic flooding in Vermont and the river that flooded Montpelier, which God used to point to the Jericho earthquake in 1927 on the same date, 7/11, as was just explained a few minutes ago. And of course, the Jericho earthquake, which in turn pointed to the Hebrews' crossing of the Jordan River in the book of Joshua into the Promised Land. So, did you get that? The flooding in Vermont hints at the crossing of the Hebrews into the Promised Land. It was the worst flooding since 1927, the year of the Jericho earthquake, which stopped the Jordan River, exactly where the Hebrews crossed into the Promised Land. And on the same day as the flooding in Vermont, we have this player that is the story of the game with his game-winning home run. He's the headlines of all the news stories. And he was born 30 years exactly before the book A Promised Land was released. And 30 years is symbolic of a king. And the Hebrews were escaping the king of Egypt. And 30 years is symbol, and Barack Obama is the Antichrist king. The Hebrews crossed the Jordan River after they had left the persecution from the king of Egypt, a type for the Antichrist. In the Bible, Joseph interpreted the dream of the king of Egypt that regarded 14 cows and 14 years, which is symbolism for the end times period of the Antichrist. Obama's A Promised Land book was released 14 days after the thing was thing. You can read it there. STOLEN. Okay? You do the math. So and you think about what happened on that date. Okay? His book was released on November 17th, 2020. What date do you get when you subtract 14 days? All right? What happened on that date? What was the big national event on that date? Well, if you're not in front of a screen reading as I'm going along here, then you just think about it, okay? And so something was STO, and then the remainder of the word is LEN on that date, okay? So it's 14 days. And that thing that happened on that date, which you can't speak about because of the political cult of the left, will result soon in Obama becoming the president again and King of America. This year's All-Star game, in which the player for the Rockies hit a prophetic home run, was 14 years after Obama threw out the ceremonial first pitch of the 2009 All-Star game on the 14th day of the month of July. Okay? The ceremonial first pitch of the 2023 All-Star game was thrown by former Seattle Mariners Ken Griffey Jr. I just want to hold up here for a second to make sure you got that, okay? So the Bible, we're talking about this connection to Egypt. We're talking about the player who was born 30 years before Obama's promised land. And in Egypt, there's this 14 symbolism, the 14 years and the 14 cows, okay? Now, before this game with this player that hints at Obama's A Promised Land book, 14 years earlier, this home run that he hit was at the All-Star game, and 14 years earlier at the All-Star game in 2009, Barack Obama threw out the ceremonial first pitch. And God uses in his signs pictures on the pitching mound to symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. Okay? Furthermore, the book was released 14 days after the you-know-what event. Okay? All right. So the ceremonial first pitch of the 2023 All-Star Game was thrown by former Seattle Mariners Ken Griffey Jr. During Ken Griffey Jr.'s first year of Major League Baseball with Seattle, his father, Ken Griffey Sr., also played his last career season with Seattle. The two players became the only father and son to hit back-to-back home runs on the 14th of the month of September in 1990, the same year as the birth of the Rockies player that hit the home run in the 2023 All-Star Game, in which Ken Griffey Jr. threw the ceremonial first pitch. The jersey numbers of Griffey Sr. and Griffey Jr., the father hit the first home run followed by the son, were 30 and 24 respectively, and they played for Seattle in the King Dome in King County in Washington. This hinted at the return of the King of Kings, symbolized by the number 30, because again, the number 30 symbolizes king, in 2024, symbolized by Griffey Jr.'s number 24, jersey number 24. This hinted at the return of the King of Kings to establish the kingdom, which is hinted at with King Dome. That was the name of the stadium. To establish the kingdom of Christ on earth. The father and son back-to-back home runs hinted at God the Father and his Son. The back-to-back home runs were hit off of Los Angeles Angels player number 15, and the 15th triangular number is 120, and in the Bible, the number 120 is symbolic of the church. Exactly 18 years and 10 months later, Barack Obama threw the ceremonial first pitch to famous Angels player Albert Pujols, who wore jersey number 5. By the way, the number 15 is the fifth prime number, and 120 is the 15th triangular number. And we have these two Angels players, okay? So we're hinting at the church here, because 120 is symbolic of the church, as I will explain. Exactly 18 years and 10 months later, after this back-to-back home run by the father and son, Barack Obama threw the ceremonial pitch to the famous player. Okay, we got that. Although at the time Pujols played for St. Louis. He's famous for playing for the Los Angeles Angels, but at the time he played for St. Louis, and the 2009 All-Star Game was played in St. Louis. This is because St. Louis is known for its Gateway Arch and is known as the Gateway to the West, and in the Bible, God's judgment on a people symbolically begins at the gates. Obama will become the president again after Kamala Harris's plane will fall from a high place and crash in St. Louis. And that is why Obama threw the first pitch at the All-Star Game in St. Louis. The exact 18 years and 10 months in between the father and son back-to-back home runs and Obama's ceremonial first pitch at the 2009 All-Star Game in St. Louis hints at the number 181, which is the 42nd prime number, And in Bible prophecy, a period of 42 months is symbolic of the period of the Antichrist's rule. This ceremonial first pitch that Obama threw to player number 5 pointed to the other ceremonial first pitch that Obama threw in 2005 when Obama wore White Sox jersey number 5 in a game against the Angels, which is why the Angels here. There's a connection here between Obama and the Los Angeles Angels. Well, first of all, the Angels and Los Angeles is Spanish for the angels, and the Angels team is symbolism for the fallen angels in Revelation chapter 12 that are thrown down with the dragon to earth, and the dragon symbolizes the Antichrist. Obama's jersey number 5, he wore a White Sox jersey number 5, and it had his name on it. It was a reference to how he had to become a U.S. senator in 2005. This was in 2005. And he had just become senator, which is why the jersey 5 number. That game ended up becoming the most controversial Major League playoff game in history, in which victory was stolen from the Angels and from Angels pitcher number 45, which hinted at the you-know-what that was STOLEN from President 45, 14 days before his book was released. The game was won with a walk-off hit by Creedy. I forget his first name. His last name is Creedy, player number 24. And this hinted at Obama, the Antichrist, in 2024. The name Creedy hints at doctrine, creed, as in doctrine. And the Nicolaitan doctrine of the do nothing or do little evangelical church that Jesus said he hates and is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth, coming to make war on with the sword of his mouth, on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this Nicolaitan doctrine, which God has overwhelmingly demonstrated to be, in his big picture of signs, sovereign grace and free grace, which come in the packages of Calvinism and dispensationalism. It is Reformed theology. Both of these false doctrines lead to the heretical doctrine, the Gnostic doctrine, and I mean that literally because it's inherited from Calvin, who profusely quoted Augustine and disparaged all of the other early church fathers that came before Augustine in the 4th century, the 5th century, and corrupted the Western church. And Augustine was a Gnostic auditor, an official Gnostic auditor of the Manichaean sect for 9 years before he joined the Catholic Church. And so in his later writings, he completely corrupted the church with Gnostic influence under the radar. And I mean that because it is from Satan, these doctrines. And they both lead to the once saved, always saved, and the myth of imputed righteousness as evangelicals understand it. The doctrine of predestination, God knowing who and who won't go to heaven before they're even born. Deplorable doctrine. Our righteousness is as filthy rags, one verse that Luther, who was an Augustinian monk, took out of context and twisted to develop his entire theology. And all Christians will be raptured. And dispensationalism, which leads to why so many people do not realize that the mark of the Antichrist is the mark of the Antichrist. The thing is the mark of the Antichrist, because they have the false understanding of eschatology that is rooted in their doctrine, which Jesus is coming to make war on with the sword of his mouth. And that, my friends, is the bottom line, the root reason for why so many people have taken the mark of the Antichrist. It is judgment for them for following this false doctrine, which is arguably inexcusable because it requires ignoring countless passages in the Bible, which evangelicals do. And those that teach doctrine and teach Calvinism and all of this, woe to them, because they're also ignoring countless passages. And anyway, one shouldn't be getting their theology from a pastor anyway. The whole position of pastor as it is today is not what was intended. Pastors are a big part of the problem, in fact. And they, like socialist dictators, restrict the body of Christ from being the body of Christ and speaking. They're the only ones that are allowed to disseminate information. They operate just like the political cult of the left today that censors information. And, just like if a reporter were to say something controversial that the political left doesn't want to be said, they would get fired. Same thing, if you stand up in church and say something that the dictator doesn't agree with, you get thrown out of church. This is the problem. This is the big root of the problem. Anyway, no one should be getting spoon-fed, and that's what happens in communist dictatorships. The populace becomes infantile because they get spoon-fed, they get taken care of, which is the purpose, the point of communism, to subdue and dumb down the people so that they can't rule themselves and require rulers to rule over them. And that's the same thing. There's a parallel with the modern church today, which, by the way, the format of the church is inherited from pagan Catholicism, where one man stands up on a podium and speaks to rows of people for an hour or an hour and a half, and then they go home after having done some singing. This is inherited from the and it's not how the early church met, and it is certainly not conducive for the body of Christ. And anyway, the point is that the false doctrine has led to dispensationalism and the awful understanding of prophecy and eschatology, which has resulted in the masses of Christians not recognizing the mark of the Antichrist. But it's judgment for their Nicolaitan doctrine that Jesus said he's coming to make war on with the sword of his mouth. Okay, and that's what's hinted at with Creedy here. So let's get back to this. This was the most controversial playoff game in Major League Baseball history, and Barack Obama threw out the ceremonial first pitch, and pitchers on the pitching mound symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount. Okay, now there's something to this, and I'm about to get to it, but the game-winning hit was hit by Creedy, which hints at creed and doctrine. All right. Now, the reason for all of this is the White Sox went on to win the 2005 World Series, and their MVP was player number 23, which hinted at Barack Obama, the basketball president that wore jersey number 23 when he played basketball in high school and will become the president again in 2023. And they won the World Series 9 months and 23 days after Obama was sworn in as the senator. And again, he pitched the ceremonial first pitch because he had become the senator. And God uses frequently 9 months and 23 days connections because God frequently pairs the numbers 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections. And that's how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter, as the Bible says is required, and that's what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And one simple way in which he would provide second witnesses is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9 and 23, because the Antichrist became the president in 2009, he wore jersey number 23, and will become the president again in 2023. Okay, so Obama was the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school and became the president in 2009. Obama is from Chicago, and the 2005 Chicago White Sox broke their sports curse, which hints at the Antichrist curse that dates back to the 1919 Chicago White Sox, euphemistically referred to as the Black Sox, and the 1919 World Series scandal that involved cheating, which, by the way, led to the first commissioner of baseball coming to power, ruling over every man in Major League Baseball, and was given unchecked power over every man in baseball, just like the Antichrist will be given in a moment of crisis unchecked power. And anyway, the 1919 World Series scandal involved cheating, and that's how the Antichrist will come to power again. God uses pitchers because of the you-know-what that was a result of cheating. God uses pitchers on the pitching mound to symbolize the Antichrist on the Temple Mount, and Obama's ceremonial first pitch on October 12, 2005, in the controversial Chicago White Sox playoff game, which pointed to the 1919 Black Sox World Series cheating controversy. This game in 2005, in which Obama pitched the ceremonial first pitch, was exactly, or is exactly, 19 years before the Day of Atonement on October 12, 2024, when Obama, the Antichrist, will be defeated on the Temple Mount at the return of the King of Kings. In other words, this is why. This is the big reason why. This is the whole thing, and Barack Obama is known for being a Chicago White Sox fan. And he threw the first pitch in the year that they broke the sports curse, which dated back to 1919, because his pitch was exactly, or is exactly, 19 years before the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ and Judgment Day, when the Antichrist will be defeated on the Temple Mount on the Day of Atonement. The Temple Mount is a high place, and this is what this connection between high place symbolism and Ken Griffey Jr., player number 24, in the 2023 All-Star Game is alluding to. Okay, so what I'm saying with the last sentence here is so the two All-Star Games were 14 years apart, as I explained. Barack Obama's in 2009, but there was also another prophetic ceremonial first pitch that Obama threw, which points to 2024, and so does Ken Griffey Jr., who threw the ceremonial first pitch in the 2023 All-Star Game. It also hints at 2024 because Ken Griffey Jr. wore jersey number 24. The 4,567th word in Strong's Greek Bible Concordance is the word Satan. The ceremonial first pitch that Obama threw at the 2009 All-Star Game in St. Louis was exactly 4,567 days before the prophetic signs on January 14th, 2022, in the mountain states that contained high place symbolism and included a plane crash. And what I mean by contained high place symbolism is that the prophetic signs contained high place symbolism, not the mountain states. The mountain states in themselves is, of course, high place symbolism. This includes Colorado and Denver, and that's why Barack Obama, for example, had his Democrat convention acceptance speech in 2008. He held it in the football stadium named Mile High Stadium in Denver, the highest city in America, because Barack Obama means lightning from high place, as I explained. Now, the other signs I've explained in other videos, I won't explain it here, but it included the 144 horses that were rescued in Rocky Mountain stables near in the Rocky Mountains near Rocky Mountain National Park, which gives it national judgment symbolism. And there was the plane crash on the roof of the Mountain Foods warehouse in Utah. And okay. Now, this 4,567 days connection between July 14th, 2009, the ceremonial first pitch that Obama threw, and And he was on the temple. He was on the pitching mound, which is also symbolic of a high place, because again, it symbolizes the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is on the top of the mount, which is a high place. And January 14th, 2022, this 4,567 days connection is also exactly 150 months. In the Bible, the flood judgment lasted for 150 days. And on the first Pentecost of the church age, it was 120 disciples in the upper room that waited for the Holy Spirit to come down. I should emphasize the upper room. 150 hints at 15, and 15 is the and the 15th triangular number is 120. And on January 14th, 2022, the prophetic plane crash in the Mountain State was on top of the roof, as in the upper room of a warehouse of a company named Mountain Foods, which hinted at the upper room on Pentecost. In other words, this connection between Obama's ceremonial first pitch at the All-Star game in St. Louis and the plane crash in the upper room, or on the upper roof of Mountain Foods, hints at the persecution of the church from the Antichrist, and he will become the president again after Harris's plane crash in St. Louis. Obama will persecute the church through enforcing the mandate to take the thing here, you know what? The snake bite, and he will enforce that with rationing of food, which is the reason for the connection of the 4,567 days, which is the word for Satan, which is 150 months, because the 15th triangular number is 120, which equals the church, between Obama and the pitcher's mound and the plane crash on the warehouse of Mountain Foods. And that was in Spanish Forks, by the way, in Utah. And that hints at Spanish flu. Anyway, I've explained all that in other videos, so. All right. The first score of the game was a home run by player number 2. The last score of the game was a 2-run home run. This hints at the number 22. And in this context, this number is symbolism for 2 things. The ceremonial first pitch was thrown by Ken Griffey Jr., who had a 22-year career. This pointed to the ceremonial first pitch thrown by Obama that was caught by Albert Pujols, who also had a 22-year career. Again, these 2 All-Star games connected. The 2 first ceremonial pitches. Okay? And both of those ceremonial pitches involved someone who had a 22-year career. It was the first All-Star game played in Seattle in 22 years. Okay. So, we've got some 2s here. The first score of the game, player number 2. The last score of the game, which is the prophetic 2-run home run. Okay, hints at 22. And we had 2 22-year careers hinted at here. And this was the first All-Star game in Seattle in 22 years. So something with the number 22. The National League won, which ended the second longest drought in All-Star game history. First. In other words, for a long streak, the American League beat the National League in the All-Star game. First, the number 22 is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing and the snake bite. The mark of the Antichrist, the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist described in the book of Ezekiel, would have been the Tav mark. And the Tav letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the last letter and the 22nd letter. The mark of the Antichrist is described in the last book of the Bible. the 22nd book out of 22 books that have a total of 22 chapters. This is why the mark of the Antichrist is symbolized by the number 22. Okay? Second, 22 is symbolic of the second coming of Lord Jesus Christ. The first score and home run was off of pitcher number 23, and the last score and home run was by player 35, and 35 is the 23rd semi-prime number. This hints at the second presidency in 2023 for the basketball president who wore jersey number 23. The game-winning home run by player 35 broke a 9-year losing streak for the National League in All-Star games. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, God pairs 9 and 23 together to confirm the signs and connections. And because 35 is the 23rd semi-prime number, it pairs with this 9-year losing streak that was broken in this game by this player. The last time the National League won was 11 years ago. So the 9-year losing streak was broken, and the last time the National League won was 11 years ago. This pairs 9 and 11 together and hints at the 9/11 warning of judgment. And again, as I just said, it pairs 9 and 23 together, which confirms the signs and also points to the basketball president who wore jersey 23 and became president in 2009 and will become the president again in 2023. The Antichrist will become the president again after Harris will die in a plane crash while serving in the White House, which parallels the death of the 35th president while he served in the White House. John Kennedy. Which is why the game-winning home run was hit by player number 35. The surnames of the two players that hit the prophetic home run is Diaz. Yandy Diaz and Elias Diaz. Yandy Diaz hit the first home run, and Elias Diaz hit the game-winning home run. The name Yandy is derived from the Latin istinus and iustus, which means just. The name Elias is the Spanish equivalent of Elijah, which comes from Elijah the prophet in the Bible. Diaz hints at dias, which is Spanish for days. God used Elias Diaz and his home run to point to the Christian hymn, The Days of Elijah, which is a widely popular song sung by Christians in churches around the world. The hymn is said to be a sort of anthem for the church today. It was written in 1994 by Robin Mark. Mark says that the Rwanda genocide in 1994 was part of the inspiration for writing the song. Obama will lead the political cult of the left in a totalitarian genocide of their enemies, true conservatives and true Christians. And the following year, after the Rwanda genocide and the song was written, Obama first entered politics and he wrote his prophetic autobiography book, Dreams from My Father, in which a dream identifies his father as Satan, a prophetic dream, and identifies him as the Antichrist. Obama is the leader of the political cult of the left. And this is why Elias Diaz's game-winning home run was hit to deep left field. Robin Mark said the following about his song, quote, "These are Elijah days. Elijah's story in the Bible of Kings, Elijah's story in the book of Kings, and you can read how he felt isolated and alone in the culture in which he lived. but God told him to stand up and speak for truth, unquote. The Bible tells the story of Elijah's days and how he spoke truth for justice. This is why God used Yonde, just, and Elias, Elijah, Diaz. Robin Mark wrote The Days of Elijah, and Elias Diaz, Elijah Days, hit a 2-run home run, and Yonde Diaz wore jersey number 2. The number 22 is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, which is why the surname of the composer is Mark. The surname Mark confirms the prophetic significance of the surname Diaz, and therefore confirms the prophetic significance of the names Yonde Diaz and Elias Diaz. As well, it was the first All-Star game in Seattle in 22 years, and the ceremonial first pitch was thrown by the famous baseball player who played for 22 years, mostly for Seattle. And again, Seattle is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. And the song, The Days of Elijah, was written by Robin Mark. The highlight of the game, and the headline for the news stories regarding this game, was the home run hit by 32-year-old Elias Diaz that made the score 3-2 and won the game for the National League, breaking their losing streak. What is also remarkable is that it was Elias Diaz's first All-Star game, even though he is 32 years old. That's quite old for a baseball player, and it's remarkable that the first game that he played in the All-Star, the first All-Star game he played in was not until he was 32 years old this year. And he made the score 3-2, which obviously hints at 32. Elias's age of 32 and this score 3-2 hint at the number 32, and 32 is 4 times 8, which hints at 48. And 48 hints at the 48th president, which will be the Antichrist, Barack Obama. The 32nd prime number is 131, and 131 days after this score of 3-2, and the flooding in the capital city of Vermont on the same day, will be the date it is predicted that the Antichrist, who will enforce the mark of the Antichrist, will become the 48th president in the capital city of the nation. The number 131 hints at the 131st word in Strong's Greek Bible Concordance, which is the word meaning blood disease. This word is used only once in the Bible, when a woman with a bleeding disorder for 12 years was healed by Jesus. The record of this directly follows, I'm talking about the account of this in the Bible, the account of this directly follows the story of when Jesus raised to life the 12-year-old girl who died, and this story directly precedes the account of Jesus sending out his 12 disciples. This is why, with the score at 1-2, player number 12, the score 1-2 hints at 12, and when the score was 1-2, player number 12 hit what looked like a home run to make the score 2-2, which hinted at 22, which is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, which causes blood disease. However, the umpire's initial call of a home run was overruled once it was examined in video replay, as the ball in fact exited the park left of the left field foul pole, which is symbolism for the foul play of the political cult of the left, the blue team, and their oppression of liberties and mandate of the thing that is the snake bite that is the mark of the Antichrist. The snake bite thing gives people blood disease. It clogs and damages their arteries, and gives them snakebite thing-induced AIDS, which is why Obama will become the 48th president 131 days after this game that was won 3-2 with the home run hit by the first-time All-Star at the age of 32. As the number 32 hints at 4 times 8 and 48, and the number 32 is the 32nd prime number is 131. Okay, I apologize for my inability to read cohesively here. There's a couple of reasons for that. But anyway, I think you got it. Barack Obama will become the 48th president on November 19th, 131 days after this 32-year-old hit the home run that made the score 32, because the 32nd prime number is 131, which is the word for blood disease. And that's why all of the 22s as well in this prophetic sign, which I explained in the previous paragraph, because it's hinting at the mark of the Antichrist. This is astounding. Obama will become the president again on the date November 19th, which hints at the warning of judgment on 9/11. The National League broke their 9 All-Star game losing streak and won their first All-Star game in 11 years, which hinted at 9/11. It is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash on her flight from Washington to Los Angeles, which will mirror the flight path of Flight 77 on 9/11. Her plane crash on October 17th, 2023, I should say her predicted plane crash on October 17th, 2023, will be exactly 32 years and 11 months after the birth of the 32-year-old that hit the home run to win the game for the National League for their first time in 11 years. He hit the home run on the day of the flooding that pointed to the Hebrews' crossing of the Jordan River, the founding of the nation with the Pilgrims' crossing of the Atlantic to their promised land in order to escape religious and political persecution from the King of England, was patterned after the Hebrews' exodus from the king of Egypt in the Bible and their crossing into the promised land. The date of the birth of the player that hit the game-winning home run was 11/17 in 1990, which was exactly 30 years before the release of A Promised Land written by the future 48th president and Antichrist king. The player that hit the home run wears jersey number 35, and A Promised Land was released exactly 35 months before it is predicted that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash that will lead to the rise of Obama, the Antichrist. This 35 months connection from the A Promised Land book hints at the 35th president who died while serving in the White House and whose presidency is mythologized as Camelot, as Camelot rhymes with Kamala, and she will likewise die while serving in the White House. Home runs are balls hit high into the air and then come back down to earth from a high place. Thus, home runs are also symbolism for a high place. The storm and flooding on 7/11 in the symbolic high place was the same day as the 93rd All-Star game that included home run balls falling from a high place. The sun in the sky above is a high place. The storm and flooding and the 93rd All-Star game on 7/11 is 7 months and 11 days before the predicted storm on the sun that is 93 million miles away that will cause fire to fall to earth. All right? So in this paragraph, I'm drawing the parallel between the balls that are hit high and then fall back to earth, which is part of the signs that point to the sun, as I explained earlier, and the fire that will fall to earth from the sun in the form of the coronal mass ejection. Okay? And that's why this All-Star game was the 93rd All-Star game. If you recall, I mentioned earlier the I-89 highway that goes through Montpelier and traverses the state of Vermont also terminates and connects to the I-93 highway, which heads to Boston, by the way. And Boston is the spiritual founding of America. And this whole theme of crossing into the promised land discussed in this video is patterned after the Pilgrims' crossing of the Atlantic, which they believed was their crossing of the into the promised land. They saw their crossing as a parallel with the Hebrews. It was known before 711 that 711 is exactly 52 months after the prophetic sign involving the MVP, most valuable player, of Super Bowl 52, the highest ever scoring Super Bowl. The high place symbolism in the prophetic signs on 711 confirmed this analysis. 711 was also exactly 5200.00% of a year after the release of the John Frankenheimer movie, The Horseman, on July 24th, 1971. Before continuing, I want to emphasize how remarkable this is. It is exactly 5200.00% of a year, this connection. All right? And that's a parallel with this 52 months connection. So we're talking about these connections involving the number 52 to 711, and these connections were known ahead of time. And so I'll continue the explanation here. So this movie, The Horseman, is a reference to the 4 horsemen in the book of Revelation. There was another movie starring Dennis Quaid titled Horsemen that was released on March 6th, 2009, the day that the S&P 500 stock market made an intraday low in the 2007 and 2009 stock market crash at 666 points. And the date 36 hints at 3 6s. Okay, so you will recall, perhaps, there was a stock market crash from the latter half of 2007 to March 2009, specifically March 3rd. That was the very bottom of the crash. And the very bottom tick, which was mentioned in mainstream news because it was remarkable, and because of, although most people don't believe in God or the Bible these days, it still made the news because the very bottom tick was 666. What the news didn't realize is that the date also hints at 3 6s and 666. And the S&P 500 stock market index hints at the Antichrist because the 500th word in Strong's Greek New Testament concordance is the word Antichrist, hence the S&P 500 stock market index. Now, Dennis Quaid is the narrator of the famous documentary Grid Down about realistic scenarios and consequences of the U.S. power grid going down. Scenarios that include a CME, coronal mass ejection, hit from the sun, which is predicted to cause food shortages, and the third horse in the apocalypse brings famine. That was just an aside. So back to the Horseman movie that was released on July 24th, 1971. The Frankenheimer-directed Horseman, The Horseman, was released on July 24th, 1971, exactly 444 months before the 44th president delivered a speech near the Temple of Pergamon, which in the Bible Jesus said is the seat of Satan, which is located in Berlin in the Pergamon Museum today, but was excavated from Turkey. And the 44th president's speech was at Victory Monument, which was where Hitler had planned to bring in the Fourth Reich, the 44th president, Fourth Reich, after a Nazi Germany victory. It was the first time that a candidate had campaigned for the presidency and delivered a speech on foreign policy from another country, which in itself revealed the man's, I'm talking about Obama's, view of himself as a leader of the world and not just America, which is Antichrist. Director John Frankenheimer also made a movie titled Black Sunday about a terrorism event using a blimp, which is a high place, symbolism, at a Super Bowl, at Super Bowl 10. In Bible prophecy, a period of 42 months is symbolic of the Antichrist. Super Bowl 10 plus 42 years gets us to Super Bowl 52. John Frankenheimer also made a movie named 52 Pickup that made $5.2 million in box office sales, and I verified that, by the way. That's actually true. It was said to be his most interesting movie since Black Sunday, about terrorism involving a blimp at a Super Bowl, at Super Bowl 10. The movie 52 Pickup confirms that Black Sunday about Super Bowl 10 pointed to Super Bowl 52. Like the blimp in the movie about Super Bowl 10, the highest scoring Super Bowl, Super Bowl 52, is also symbolism for a high place. This is why the prophetic signs involving high place symbolism on 7/11/2023 were exactly 52 months after the prophetic sign involving MVP of Super Bowl 52 and the sky-high $88 million contract he signed on March 11th, 2019. March 11th, 2019 was exactly 3 times 70 months after the plane struck the Twin Towers in a high place on 9/11. The towers were 110 stories because in the Bible, Joshua died at the age of 110 after he led the Hebrews around the walls of security of Jericho in a symbolic 3 sets of 7. They marched around the walls once per day for 7 days, and then on the 7th day they marched 7 times while 7 priests blew 7 trumpets, which is what 3 times 70 months hints at. In other words, it's confirmation of the connection from 9/11, because 9/11 hints at Joshua, for one reason being the collapse of the towers that were 110 stories, and Joshua died at the age of 110 after the walls of security collapsed, and there was a 3 sets of 7, hence the 3 times 70 months from 9/11 to March 11th, 2019, which was the day of the prophetic sign involving the MVP of Super Bowl 52, which was the highest scoring Super Bowl, which connects with 52 months to the 7/11/2023 signs with the high place symbolism. A documentary was made titled Heroes of the 88th Floor that told their story inside the 110-storied tower, which is why the MVP of the highest scoring Super Bowl was the 88th selected in his draft and was involved in the most famous trick play in Super Bowl history involving himself and player number 88, and signed his $88 million contract exactly 3 times 70 months after 9/11 and the 88 heroes of the heroes of the 88th floor. And he signed his $88 million contract exactly 52 months before the signs with high place symbolism on July 11th, 2023. In the movie Black Sunday, the blimp crashes. The signs involving high place symbolism connect prophetically to the date it is predicted that Kamala Harris's plane will crash. I forgot to add that the 32-year-old player hit his home run to make the score 3-2 in Seattle. In addition to hinting at adding the 32nd prime number, 131 days, to get the date it is predicted that the 48th president, 32 equals 4 times 8, will be sworn in. The city of Seattle also identifies the mark of the Antichrist, the city itself. This is because Seattle is known for its iconic Space Needle Tower, which is a high place. The Space Needle hints at the needle things that are the mark of the Antichrist. This is why Elias Diaz hints at the hymn The Days of Elijah, written by Robinson Mark. The thing, snakebite, is transhumanism technology. The space in Space Needle hints at transhumanism technology, for which the story of the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11 is a prophetic type, a prefigure. In fact, the Space Needle Tower is ideal symbolism. It is the ideal symbol for conveying the concepts of the Tower of Babel story and transferring them to the present moment. This is why the 32-year-old Elias Diaz made the score 3-2 next to the Space Needle 131 days before the enforcer of the mark of the Antichrist will come to power. As it is 131 days, which hints at G131, the word for blood disease, the result of taking the mark of the Antichrist thing, snakebite. This is amazing. This is why this all-star game and everything. Well, I actually continue here in this paragraph here. So this is also why this all-star game next to the Space Needle Tower was 22 years after the last all-star game next to the Space Needle Tower. 22 hints at the number 22. 22 years hints at the number 22, which is symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist. This is also why the ceremonial first pitch was thrown by Ken Griffey Jr., who played for 22 years, mostly next to the Space Needle Tower. His first pitch connects to the ceremonial first pitch of the Antichrist in the All-Star game 14 years earlier, because 14 years hints at the end times, and this is why on the date of Ken Griffey Jr.'s first pitch, 14 years after the Antichrist's first pitch, was the flooding in the 14th state. Vermont equals Green Mountain, a high place, as is the Space Needle Tower. The Space Needle Tower in Seattle is also why the first home run of the game was hit by Yandy Diaz, who wears jersey number 2, and why the last game-winning home run of the game hit by Elias Diaz was a 2-run home run. Jersey number 2 and the 2-run home run hint at 22, the number that symbolizes the mark of the Antichrist, and these home runs were hit next to the Space Needle Tower. All right, this is the end of part 1, and believe it or not, this is just the getting started here. This information so far regarding the relevance and importance of the prophetic signs on July 11th is just getting started, and it's going to get much, much more interesting, exponentially more interesting. As in part 2, I will demonstrate and explain how these signs fit into the big picture of signs. Part 2 will be very different. It will be a diagram. It won't be me reading emails. It will be a diagram and me explaining the big picture of signs, which point to these various predictions. For example, the date that Kamala Harris will die in a plane crash, October 17th. The date Barack Obama will become the president on November 19th. The date of a dirty bomb explosion on September 25th, and much more. So the date of the rapture, the date of the explosion on the surface of the sun that will cause catastrophic power outages. All of this is connected to with the big picture of signs that stems from the prophetic signs on July 11th. In other words, it's a key integral piece of the puzzle, July 11th, but I've just shown you one piece of the puzzle now. Now I'm going to show you the rest of the puzzle in part 2. And so make sure you watch part 2. I will either leave a link in the description box below, or you can find it on the BitChute channel and Odysee channel, odysee.com, ADYSEE, odysee.com. Search for the Kamala Harris Crash Prediction channel. And then just search for part 2. It shouldn't be hard to find. You can search within the channel. You can use the search option within Odysee to search within the channel once you find the channel. You can search the videos within my channel. Harris Crash Prediction. Make sure you watch part 2. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more. Don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, TrumpPrediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the BitChute.com or the Odysee.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.